Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku led the young Avengers as Earth's final hope. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The silence was the first thing that broke you. Not the monsters, not the hunger, not the sky the color of a day-old bruise. It was the silence. New York City had never been silent. It had been a symphony of chaos. A roaring, breathing thing made of taxi horns, shouting vendors, rumbling subways, and the murmur of 8 million lives lived in parallel. Kate Bishop remembered that sound. She clung to the memory of it like a holy relic, a reminder of a world that had been stolen in a single, silent scream. Now, the only sound was the scuff of her worn combat boots on rubble-strewn asphalt, and the whisper of the wind through the glassless canyons of Midtown. The wind was a liar. It carried no laughter, no music, no life. It only carried the fine, gray dust of pulverized concrete and the faint, metallic scent of ozone that never truly left the air. Above her, the sky was a permanent, sickly violet. It wasn't a natural twilight. It was a psychic stain, the visible aura of the entity they called the Overmind. It pressed down on the world, a constant, low-level hum at the edge of hearing that frayed nerves and smothered hope. Kate moved with the fluid economy of a creature honed by its environment. Her back was to the graffiti-scarred wall of what was once a bakery. Her custom-made Hoyt bow held low and ready. Her gaze swept across the street, a landscape of skeletal cars and shattered storefronts. She wasn't looking for movement, not exactly. She was looking for the wrong kind of stillness. There, across the street, half hidden in the shadow of an overturned city bus, were 3 figures. They stood perfectly still, their heads cocked at an unnatural angle, all facing the same direction as if listening to a silent command. Husks. They had been people once. A mailman, a woman in a business suit, a teenager in a hoodie. Now, their eyes were a milky, vacant white, their minds hollowed out and puppeteered by the Overmind. They were its censors, its patrols, its grim reminder that nowhere was safe, that even your neighbor could become a mindless extension of the enemy's will. They didn't run, they didn't shout. They simply walked, a relentless, shambling tide that overwhelmed you with sheer, silent numbers. Kate's mission today was simple, depressingly so. Medical supplies. The small stash of antibiotics in their hideout was running low, and Billy had been running a fever. There was a pharmacy 3 blocks down that looked relatively untouched. Getting there was the easy part. Getting back was the gamble. She knocked a custom arrow, its head a blunt, rubberized bulb filled with a high-voltage capacitor. A non-lethal takedown. It was a rule she and the others held to, a thin line of morality they refused to cross. The husks were victims, not monsters. It was a distinction that felt increasingly academic with each passing day. She took a deep breath, the dusty air scratching at her throat, and prepared to move. She would use the rooftops, a longer but safer route. She just needed a clear path to the fire escape at the end of the block. That was when the sky tore open. It didn't start with a sound, but with a feeling, a violent, nauseating lurch in the fabric of reality itself. Kate stumbled, her hand flying to her head as a wave of vertigo washed over her. The violet sky began to shimmer, then ripple like disturbed water. A high-pitched shriek, like metal grinding against reality, split the oppressive silence. Kate looked up, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. A pinprick of impossible light appeared, then expanded with terrifying speed. It wasn't a hole. It was a wound, a bleeding, 5-pointed star of searing, polychromatic energy punched through the Overmind's purple shroud. It was beautiful and utterly terrifying. From the heart of this cosmic wound, something was ejected. A dark shape, tumbling end over end, wreathed in emerald lightning. It was too small to be a ship, too solid to be an energy discharge. It looked, impossibly, like a person. The figure plummeted towards the earth, a green comet on a collision course with the heart of the dead city. The star-shaped portal behind it snapped shut with a thunderclap that echoed off the skyscrapers, leaving behind a shimmering afterimage that slowly faded into the bruised twilight. The silence that followed was deeper, more profound, as if the entire city was holding its breath. Then, a deafening crack boom shook the street as the object impacted 2 blocks away. A plume of gray dust and debris erupted into the air. Kate was frozen for a long second, her mind struggling to process what she just witnessed. An attack? A new weapon from the Overmind? No. The energy had felt different. It was chaotic, wild, but it wasn't the cold, dominating presence of the psychic tyrant. It was something else. Her survival instincts screamed at her to run, to get back to the tower and warn the others. But the archer, the hero that Clint Barton had trained, wouldn't let her. This was an unknown variable in a deadly equation. She had to know what it was. Slipping into the shadows, she began to move, silent as a ghost, towards the crash site. Izuku Midoriya knew pain. He was intimately familiar with the agony of shattered bones, torn ligaments, and the searing burn of one for all pushed beyond its limits. But this was different. This was a full-body violation. 1 second, he had been practicing his new pinpoint float maneuver with all might in a simulated cityscape at UA High. The next, the world had dissolved into a nauseating kaleidoscope of color and sound. He felt a colossal, unseen hand grab him, pull him, and squeeze him through a pinhole in reality. He tumbled through an abyss of screaming light, his every atom feeling like it was being simultaneously ripped apart and crushed together. Then freefall. The air was cold, thin, and smelled of ash and rust. His landing was less a landing and more of a controlled cataclysm. He instinctively wrapped himself in a 15% cowl of One for All, tucking into a roll at the last possible second. He still hit the ground with the force of a small meteor, carving a spiderweb of cracks into the asphalt, and skidding a dozen meters through debris before coming to a jarring halt against the crumpled hood of a taxi. For a moment, he just lay there, the world a spinning, blurry mess. His head felt like it was full of angry hornets. Green lightning, a wild and untamed torrent of it, crackled over his battered costume, shorting out against the metal frame of the car. Okay, Midoriya, analysis, he mumbled, his voice hoarse. He pushed himself up, his limbs screaming in protest. His suit was torn in several places, and he could already feel a deep ache spreading through his ribs. Training simulation, malfunction? Villain attack? Quirk, transportation quirk? He finally got his feet under him and took in his surroundings. The world snapped into a horrifying, surreal focus. This wasn't UA's training ground. This wasn't Mizurufu. This was devastation. Utter, complete, and silent. He stood in a crater of his own making in the middle of a wide street flanked by towering buildings that scraped a sky of the most unsettling purple he had ever seen. The windows of these titans were dark, shattered eyes and concrete faces. Wrecked vehicles, covered in a thick layer of dust, littered the streets like forgotten toys. There were no people. No birds. No sound but a low, mournful wind. Then, his danger sense went off. It wasn't the familiar, sharp jolt that warned of an incoming punch or a piece of falling debris. This was a drowning. A full sensory, psychic scream that erupted from every direction at once. It was a constant, high-frequency thrum of pure wrongness, a baseline of existential threat that pressed in on him from the very air he was breathing. It was so overwhelming, so pervasive, that it was almost useless. It was like trying to hear a whisper in the middle of a rock concert. The entire world was a threat. He clutched his head, a genuine gasp of pain escaping his lips. What is this? What is happening? He tried to focus, to push past the psychic static. He scanned the area, his hero training kicking in despite the confusion. Debris, cars, abandoned storefronts, and movement. Down the street, huddled in the darkened maw of a subway entrance, was a small group of people. A woman was clutching a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, to her chest. An elderly man stood beside them, leaning on a bent piece of rebar as a cane. They were staring at him, their faces pale with a mixture of terror and awe. Survivors. A wave of relief washed over him. He wasn't alone. He could help. He took a hesitant step towards them, raising a hand in what he hoped was a reassuring gesture. It's okay. I'm here too. His danger sense, which had been a deafening roar, suddenly spiked in a specific direction. A sharp, piercing alarm that cut through the background noise. He spun around, dropping into a low stance. From the alleys and shadows they emerged. 3 figures at first, then 5, then a dozen. They moved with a synchronized, shambling gait, their limbs moving with the jerky imprecision of marionettes. Their eyes, milky and unfocused, were all locked on the survivors in the subway entrance. The husks. Deku's mind raced. Villains? Their movements are unnatural. A hive mind quirk? They aren't looking at me. Their target is the civilians. I have to protect them. The husks began to close in, their silence more menacing than any battle cry. The woman in the subway entrance let out a small, terrified whimper, pulling her child tighter. There was no more time for questions. There were people in danger. That was the only truth that mattered. The green lightning of One for All flared to life, a vibrant, defiant beacon in the gloom. Stay back! He yelled, his voice echoing in the dead street. The husks didn't react. They continued their slow, inexorable advance. Deku pushed off the ground, the pavement cracking under the force. He wasn't aiming for a knockout blow. These people looked sick, controlled. He had to incapacitate them, not obliterate them. One for all, full cal 5%. He became a blur of green energy, weaving between the shambling figures. His movements were precise, controlled. He landed at the epicenter of the closing circle, between the husks and the subway entrance. Detroit. Smash! He slammed his fist into the asphalt. He wasn't targeting any single husk. He was targeting the ground beneath them. The resulting shockwave was a contained, focused blast of air pressure. It wasn't a world-breaking punch, but in the oppressive silence of this city, it sounded like a cannon shot. The asphalt buckled and cracked. The nearest husks were thrown back, tumbling over one another like bowling pins. The others staggered, their synchronized advance broken. They weren't destroyed, merely disoriented and scattered. They lay on the ground, twitching for a moment, before slowly, jerkily beginning to push themselves back up. It was a perfect, non-lethal crowd control maneuver. A display of immense power, wielded with surgical precision and heroic restraint. And from a rooftop half a block away, Kate Bishop watched the whole thing, her bow half-drawn, her breath caught in her throat. She had seen power before. She had stood next to Thor as he summoned lightning from a clear sky. She had watched the Hulk level a building with a single punch. But that was before. Since the Great Silencing, all power was the Overmind's power. It was corrupt, cold, and dominating. This was different. The green lightning that danced around the newcomer was vibrant. It felt alive. It was wild, powerful, but clean. Uncorrupted. The way he moved, the way he deliberately struck the ground to avoid harming the husks, it was the act of a hero. A real hero. The kind she thought had gone extinct. Her mind reeled. Who was this boy? Where did he come from? The colors of his costume were garish, almost painfully bright in this gray world. He looked like a comic book character that had leaped off the page and into a post-apocalyptic nightmare. Deku stood panting, the green lightning receding into his skin. He glanced back at the survivors, giving them a shaky but reassuring smile. It's all right now. You're safe. Don't move, a sharp voice commanded from behind him. Deku flinched, spinning around. Perched on the edge of a fire escape was a figure clad in purple and black. She was aiming a sleek, high-tech bow at him, the arrowhead glinting in the violet light. Her expression was a mask of cold, hard suspicion. Kate dropped lightly to the street, her movements silent and sure. She kept the bow trained on his chest, her eyes scanning him from head to toe. Who are you? Where did you come from? That energy, it's not his. Deku held up his hands, his mind still trying to catch up. A new person. An archer. Was she a hero? Her posture was tense, hostile. My name is Deku. I'm a hero in training. I don't know where I am. There was a portal. Deku? Kate scoffed, the name sounding foreign and ridiculous on her tongue. A hero in training? Kid, you're a little late for school. Class was cancelled. Permanently. Her eyes flicked past him to the husks, who were slowly beginning to stir and regroup. Then she looked at the terrified family still huddled in the subway. Her gaze softened for a fraction of a second before hardening again as it landed back on him. You're an anomaly, she said, her voice low. You shouldn't be here. People with power don't just fall out of the sky anymore. Not unless he allows it. He? Who are you talking about? Deku asked, his confusion mounting. What happened to this city? Where are the heroes? Where are the Avengers? The name hung in the air between them, heavy and cold. Kate's face tightened, a flicker of profound, deep-seated grief crossing her features before being buried under a layer of cynical steel. She lowered her bow, but only by an inch. The Avengers, she said, her voice flat and dead, are gone. They're all gone. The weight of those 3 words hit Deku harder than the fall from the sky. Gone. It didn't compute. The Avengers? The symbol of heroism in so many worlds, a concept that transcended dimensions? Gone? What do you mean gone? He stammered, his mind refusing to accept it. An enemy attack? Did a villain? Kate let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. A villain? We'd be so lucky. A villain can be punched. A villain has a plan you can foil. This isn't a villain, kid. This is an extinction event with a god complex. She gestured with her bow to the purple, oppressive sky. You feel that? That pressure at the back of your skull? That's the overmind. It came, it saw, and it conquered. Not with an army, not at first. It used the psychic wave. The great silencing. It turned heroes against each other. It showed them their worst fears, amplified their deepest traumas, and broke their minds before its physical forces even arrived. Deku listened, his blood running cold. A psychic attack. It explained the all-encompassing nature of his danger sense. The threat wasn't a person or a bomb. It was the very atmosphere, saturated with malevolent intent. It took the strongest first, Kate continued, her voice becoming a distant, reciting monotone, as if she were listing historical facts instead of reliving a nightmare. Telepaths like Professor Xavier, they were gone in an instant. Then it moved on to the heavy hitters. It whispered to the Hulk that he was a monster until he believed it. It trapped Thor in a waking nightmare of Ragnarok. It turned Iron Man's own armor into an Iron Maiden. They were the world's greatest heroes, and they were dismantled from the inside out. She finally lowered her bow completely, the energy for the confrontation seemingly draining out of her, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. The rest of us, we were just cleanup. Deku stared at her, then at the ruined city around them. A world without its symbols. A world where hope had been methodically, surgically excised. The sheer scale of the tragedy was overwhelming. He thought of All Might, of his friends at UA. What if this had happened to their world? The thought was a cold knot of dread in his stomach. I'm sorry, he said, the words feeling pitifully inadequate. Save it, Kate clipped back, her defensive walls snapping back into place. Sorry doesn't get us food or medicine. It doesn't bring anyone back. She studied him again, her gaze intense. But you're different. That power. The Overmind's influence, it's not on you. It's like you're in a blind spot. Why? I don't know, Deku answered honestly. My quirk, my power, it's unique. It's passed down from person to person. He didn't have time to explain the intricacies of One for All, but he instinctively knew its nature was key. It was an energy born of a different reality, with different rules. Perhaps that's why the Overmind couldn't get a foothold. Kate processed this, her pragmatic mind sifting through the impossible facts. A boy from another dimension. A power the Overmind can't touch. An accidental arrival. It was a cocktail of insanity and impossibility. But he had saved those people. He had fought with a control and purpose she hadn't seen in months. The survivors were now hesitantly making their way out of the subway entrance, giving both Deku and Kate a wide berth as they scurried away into the ruins. The stunned husks were getting to their feet, their heads slowly swiveling as they reacquired the Overmind's silent commands. It was time to go. Kate made a decision. It was a risk. A massive one. In this world, trust was a currency more valuable than gold and far more dangerous to spend. But their current strategy, hiding, scavenging, and slowly losing ground, was just a prolonged death sentence. This boy, this Deku, was the first new thing to happen in this world in a long time. He was a stone thrown into a stagnant, poisoned pond. And right now, She'd take the ripples over the silence any day. She jerked her head towards the skeletal, A-less monolith that loomed over the skyline, a tombstone for a bygone era. You want to help? Fine. But you need to see what we're up against. You need to meet the other ghosts. Deku looked from her determined, tired face to the ruined tower. He was lost, terrified, and stranded in a dying world. But he was also a hero. And there were people here who needed one. His own fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. He met her gaze, his own green eyes clearing with a resolve that seemed to momentarily push back the gloom. Okay, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Lead the way. Kate gave a curt nod. Good. Rule 1, stay quiet. Rule 2, don't get sentimental about the husks. And Rule 3, she said, glancing at his brightly colored, tattered costume, we really need to find you a new outfit. You stick out like a sore thumb. With that, she turned and melted into the shadows of a nearby alley. Deku, the green comet who had fallen on a silent city, took a deep breath of the dead world's air and followed her into the twilight. He was no longer just a hero in training. He was an anomaly. And in a world choked by a singular, oppressive mind, an anomaly was the only thing that could pass for hope. The journey to Avengers Tower was a funeral procession through a city of ghosts. Kate led, moving with a predator's grace through the skeletal remains of Manhattan, and Deku followed, a splash of garish, hopeful color in a world that had forgotten the sun. He felt like an open wound, his vibrant costume a stark contrast to the monochrome decay. Every block was a monument to failure. Kate pointed them out with a grim, detached finality, her voice a tour guide's monotone narrating the end of the world. That's the Baxter Building, she said, gesturing with her bow towards a skyscraper whose top floors had been twisted into a grotesque, melted sculpture of blue metal and glass. The Fantastic Four. The Overmind turned Reed's intellect against him. Showed him a million equations for saving the world, all of which ended with his family's death. He just broke. The building imploded an hour later. Deku's breath hitched. Reed Richards, a mind that could map the multiverse, shattered by an unsolvable emotional paradox. It was a cruelty that defied comprehension. Further on, they passed a brownstone on Bleecker Street. Its iconic circular window was dark and shattered, and a chillingly perfect circle of rot and decay radiated from the front door, turning the surrounding brownstones to black dust. The Sanctum Sanctorum, Kate continued, her voice devoid of inflection. Dr. Strange was one of the first lines of defense. He held the psychic wave back for 17 minutes. We could feel it, this bubble of sanity in the chaos. Then, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the screaming. Deku's mind, his analytical, hero-worshipping mind, was reeling. This wasn't a battle. It was a series of assassinations, targeting not just the body, but the very essence of what made each hero who they were. The Overmind didn't just defeat its enemies, it unmade them. His danger sense was still a constant, oppressive hum, the psychic equivalent of tinnitus. But as they drew closer to the familiar shape of Avengers Tower, a new, sharper spike of danger pricked at his senses. He scanned the area, his eyes darting into every shadow. Husks, he whispered, spotting several motionless figures in the doorways ahead. I see them, Kate replied without turning. They're guards. This whole area is a low-level patrol zone. She led him into a darkened alley, pressing her back against the cold brick. The main entrance is a death trap. The Overmind knows the tower is a symbol. It left the ground floor as a lure for any hopeful stragglers. She moved to a large, graffiti-covered metal grate on the ground. With a grunt of effort, she slid it aside, revealing a dark, circular shaft descending into the earth. The old service tunnels for Stark's private subway line. It's the only safe way in. The descent was dark and smelled of damp earth and ozone. The only light came from the faint, emerald glow of One for All that Deku unconsciously activated, casting long, dancing shadows on the curved walls. They moved in silence for what felt like an eternity before Kate stopped at a reinforced steel door, almost invisible in the gloom. She knocked a complex rhythm, 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 slow ones. A small slit slid open at eye level, and a pair of wary blue eyes peered out. A moment later, a series of heavy deadbolts were thrown, and the door swung inward with a groan of stressed metal. You're back, a voice said, laced with equal parts relief and exhaustion. I was starting to think, who the hell is he? The figure who greeted them was a young woman, perhaps a year or two younger than Deku. She had reddish blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and grease stains on her cheek. She was holding a large, complex-looking wrench like a weapon, and her eyes, wide and haunted, were fixed on Deku's costume. He's a new variable, Kate said, stepping inside. Cassie, this is Deku. Deku, this is Cassie Lang. Cassie Lang. Stature. Daughter of Ant-Man. Deku's mind supplied the information instantly, a painful jolt of recognition. The girl in front of him looked nothing like the smiling pictures he'd seen in interdimensional hero archives. The light in her eyes seemed to have gone out. She gave Deku a wary once-over before her gaze fell to the bag of medical supplies in Kate's hand. Did you get the antibiotics? Got 'em, Kate confirmed. Billy? Worse, Cassie mumbled, her shoulders slumping. The static is bad today. Tommy can't get him to focus. The heavy door boomed shut behind them, plunging them into the low, humming light of their sanctuary. They called it the Nest. It was a fortified sublevel of the tower, one of Tony Stark's many secret R&D labs that had been hardened against everything from a nuclear blast to a full-scale Hulk tantrum. Now, it was a tomb and a home. The space was a chaotic fusion of cutting-edge technology and teenage squalor. Wires snaked across the floor like metallic vines, connecting salvaged power cells to a flickering bank of monitors. An Iron Man helmet, its faceplate cracked, sat on a workbench next to a half-eaten bag of stale chips. Empty ration packs were piled in a corner next to a stack of Captain America's old vinyl records. The air hummed with the sound of a struggling ventilation system and smelled of recycled air, ozone, and the faint, sweet scent of decay. Deku took it all in, his heart aching. This wasn't a headquarters. It was a lifeboat, crewed by orphans adrift in a sea of ashes. He saw the others then. The remnants of a generation. In the center of the room, a young man with dark skin and a powerful build sat on a crate, his back ramrod straight. He was methodically, almost obsessively, polishing a familiar circular shield of red, white, and blue. The iconic star was scuffed and scarred, a deep gash marring the paint near the edge. The sound of his rough cloth against the vibranium was a rhythmic, meditative whisper in the quiet room. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on his work with a ferocious intensity that bordered on prayer. Across the room, a blur of silver and white sipped from one wall to another, leaving faint afterimages in its wake. A boy with shocking white hair, his movements too fast to properly track, was vibrating with a nervous, kinetic energy that felt like a scream trapped in a bottle. He would stop for a nanosecond to glare at a monitor, then be across the room again, his impatience a palpable force. And curled on a cot in the dimmest corner of the lab, another boy, his twin, was wrapped in a thin blanket. His dark hair was matted with sweat, and his hands were pressed tight against his temples. Motes of faint, reddish energy sparked and fizzled around his fingertips, like dying embers. Even from across the room, Deku could feel the waves of pain and fear rolling off him. "All right, settle down," Kate said, her voice taking on a command authority it hadn't possessed in the open city. The silver-haired boy, Tommy, skidded to a halt in front of her, his green eyes crackling with agitation. "Where have you been? And what did you bring home? A stray mascot?" He jabbed a thumb at Deku, his words coming out in a rapid-fire burst. "Doesn't he know bright colors are a death sentence out there? Or is that the point? Going for death by fashion disaster?" "Tommy, shut up," Kate said, not unkindly. "Everyone, this is Deku. He fell out of the sky. Literally." Cassie looked up from the helmet she had started tinkering with, a PIM tech design, Deku noted, her expression shifting from wary to confused. "Fell out of the sky." It was the boy with the shield who spoke next, his voice a low, gravelly rumble of pure resentment. He didn't look up from his task. "A stranger. You brought a stranger here, Kate. He's not corrupted, Eli," Kate stated simply. "And he's got power. The real kind." At this, Eli finally stopped his polishing. He slowly raised his head, and his eyes, dark and filled with an old man's fury, locked onto Deku. The sheer, undiluted animosity in that gaze made Deku take an involuntary step back. "Power," Eli repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Everyone had power. Look where it got them. He set the shield down with a reverence that was almost painful to watch and stood up. He was tall, built like the soldier he was trying to be, and he radiated an aura of coiled, bitter rage. He stalked towards Deku, his eyes raking over the green costume, the ridiculous rabbit-ear cowl, the determined but utterly out-of-place look on Deku's face. So Eli began, his voice dangerously soft as he circled Deku like a wolf inspecting a lamb. A new hero appears, just after all the old ones are dead and buried. Convenient. He stopped directly in front of Deku, forcing him to meet his glare. Where were you when the sky fell? Where were you when they needed heroes? Hiding? Waiting for the dust to settle before you came out to play dress-up? Eli, knock it off, Kate warned, stepping forward. No, Eli snapped, his gaze never leaving Deku. He walks in here wearing the colors of hope like he earned them. He needs to understand what those colors cost. He turned his back on Deku and addressed the room, his voice rising with a grief so profound it had curdled into pure anger. He needs to know what happened. A heavy silence fell over the nest. This was clearly a familiar, painful ritual. Kate was the first to speak, her voice losing its hard edge and taking on a brittle, fragile quality. It was a psychic broadcast. A single, global wave. There was no warning. One moment, the world was normal. The next, it was screaming. Cassie hugged herself, her eyes distant and wet. My dad, he was at a press conference. I was watching on TV. His palms were open. I heard him. I heard him start talking about Mom. About how he failed her. Then he just started shrinking. He didn't stop. The comms just went silent. Her voice broke on a sob, and she buried her face in her hands. Tommy, for all his snark, appeared at her side in an instant, his hand hovering hesitantly over her shoulder before resting there, a rare moment of stillness for him. Eli picked up the narrative, his voice hard as steel. It was chaos. Heroes turning on civilians. Teammates turning on each other. The Overmind didn't just attack their bodies, it weaponized their souls. It found every crack, every doubt, every failure, and ripped it wide open. He walked back to the shield and picked it up, holding it like a burden. Captain America fell defending a street full of people from the Hulk. Not because he was outmatched. Because he couldn't bring himself to fight Bruce. He just kept trying to talk him down, right up to the end. Deku felt a cold dread seep into his bones. He thought of his own friends. Of the fierce, unspoken bond between him and Bakugo. Of his promise to protect Uraraka. Of the immense weight of All Might's legacy. The Overmind's strategy was diabolical. It had turned the heroes' greatest strength, their humanity, their connections, their love, into their fatal weakness. Iron Man was taken out by his own suit, Tommy added, his voice sharp and bitter. The AI started whispering to him that he was a merchant of death, that every piece of tech he ever built only led to suffering. It locked him inside and flew straight into the sun. We saw the streak in the sky. It was a litany of gods falling from their heavens. A pantheon systematically and personally dismantled. They weren't just defeated, they were desecrated. And after the minds were broken, Eli concluded, his voice dropping to a near whisper, after the chaos peaked, then its army arrived. The Void Swarm. Biomechanical horrors that cleaned up what was left, and the husks, it hollowed out millions, turning them into its eyes and ears. He turned back to Deku, his face a mask of raw, unfiltered pain. That's the world you just fell into, hero. A world of legacies and ashes. A world we failed to save. So I'll ask you again, he said, taking a deliberate step closer, his shadow falling over Deku. Where were you? Deku stood frozen, the weight of their collective trauma pressing down on him. What could he say? I'm from another dimension? It sounded like a child's excuse. I was in class? It felt like an insult. He had no answer that could possibly measure up to the scale of their loss. He began, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know. I'm sorry for your loss. I truly am. If I had been here, I would have fought with you. Words, Eli spat venomously. Cheap, easy words. You weren't here. You didn't see it. You don't get to understand. He pointed a trembling finger at the shield. He earned this. They all earned their symbols. You just showed up in a fancy costume after the war was already lost. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. It felt like a spark could ignite the entire place. Deku knew that anything he said would be wrong. He had no right to their grief, no place in their history. He was just an outsider, a ghost from a world that still had hope. It was then that a new voice cut through the oppressive atmosphere. It was weak, strained, but it carried an unnatural resonance that made everyone freeze. The static. All eyes turned to the corner, where the boy on the cot was pushing himself into a sitting position. Billy. His face was pale and slick with sweat, his dark eyes wide and unfocused. His gaze, however, seemed to be fixed on Deku. Billy, take it easy, Tommy said, zipping to his brother's side. Billy ignored him, one hand still pressed to his temple as if to keep his skull from splitting open. The static, the overmind, it's like a constant scream in my head. A million angry voices, all the time. It never stops. He took a shaky breath, his eyes slowly focusing on Deku with a look of dawning wonder. But around him, it's quiet. Everyone stared at Deku. Eli's hostile expression faltered, replaced by one of grudging confusion. Billy continued, his voice growing a little stronger. It's not gone, but it's muffled. Damped. Like he's standing in the eye of the storm. The overmind's presence, it slips off of him. It can't get a grip. He looked at Kate, then at the others, a flicker of something that hadn't been seen in this room for a long time appearing in his eyes, curiosity. The overmind. I don't think it can see him clearly. The revelation landed in the center of the room like a grenade. An anomaly. A blind spot. A glitch in the system that had conquered a planet. Deku looked down at his hands, a torrent of understanding crashing over him. One for all. It wasn't just a stockpiling quirk. It was a torch, passed down through generations, a concentration of human will and spirit. It was an energy signature that didn't belong to this universe's laws, a piece of code written in a language the overmind couldn't read. In a war fought on a psychic battlefield, he was invisible. Kate was the first to grasp the tactical implications. She looked from Billy's awestruck face to Deku's bewildered one. A blind spot, she repeated, the words tasting of possibility. It wasn't hope, not yet. Hope was a four-letter word in this world. But it was a chance. A weapon. Something new. She turned to Eli, whose angry certainty was now warring with a pragmatic need to survive. See Eli? She said, her voice firm. That's why I brought him here. Not because he's a symbol, not because he's a hero, but because he's something the overmind can't account for. Eli stared at Deku, his jaw working silently. The animosity was still there, etched into the lines on his face. He didn't trust this newcomer. He didn't like the easy way he wore the mantle of a hero, but he couldn't deny what Billy had said. Wiccan's connection to the overmind's psychic pollution was a painful, undeniable fact of their lives. If he said Deku was a ghost in the machine, then he was. Finally, Eli let out a frustrated sigh, a puff of air that seemed to carry some of the tension out of the room with it. He turned away, picking up his polishing cloth again, but he didn't resume his work on the shield. Fine, he grunted, his back to them all. He can stay. For now. But he's your responsibility, Kate. And the first time he messes up, the first time he gets one of us killed because he doesn't understand the rules. He left the threat hanging in the air, unspoken but perfectly clear. Deku stood in the center of the room, under the collective gaze of Earth's last, broken generation of heroes. He wasn't a teammate. He wasn't a friend. He was a strategic asset. A curiosity. A walking, talking blind spot in the enemy's all-seeing eye. It wasn't the welcome he would have dreamed of. But as he looked at the faces around him, Cassie's grief, Tommy's restless energy, Billy's pain, Eli's burden, and Kate's weary resolve, he knew it was a start. He had a purpose here. These people, this broken team living in a legacy of ashes, they didn't need another symbol to mourn. They needed a weapon, and maybe, just maybe, if he could show them how to wield it, he could help them become heroes again. The first few days were a study in dysfunction. Deku, used to the structured chaos and competitive camaraderie of Class 1A, found himself in a house of ghosts haunted by their own potential. They existed in the same space, but not together. They were a constellation of individual, flickering lights, so consumed by their own orbits of grief and fear that they had forgotten how to form a galaxy, Deku observed. It was his oldest, most ingrained instinct. Before he had power, he had a notebook. Before he could fight, he could analyze. He watched them from the periphery, a quiet, green-clad specter in their high-tech tomb, and he took mental notes. Their survival was a testament to Kate's pragmatism and the sheer defensibility of Stark's lab. They had power, water recyclers, and a small hydroponics bay for nutrient paste. They were surviving, but they weren't living, and they certainly weren't fighting. They were waiting. Waiting for the food to run out, for the power to fail, for the overmind to finally find them. The breaking point, for Deku, came during a so-called training simulation. Kate had programmed one of Stark's holographic training rooms to simulate a void swarm ambush. 10 drones, medium density, open street environment. It was a simple objective: protect a designated civilian dummy and eliminate the hostiles. It was a catastrophe. Eli, predictable as sunrise, went in first. He was the shield, the legacy of Captain America burning in his veins. He charged headlong, shield raised, a one-man phalanx. The first 3 holographic drones shattered against his vibranium defense. But the others adapted. They flanked him, swarming him from 3 sides at once. He was strong, durable, but he was slow. He became a stationary island being eroded by a relentless tide. "I need cover," he roared, deflecting an energy blast that sizzled against the wall. Tommy was supposed to be that cover. His role was skirmisher, hit-and-run attacks to disorient the flankers. He did it, for about 5 seconds. He zipped in, a silver blur, shattering 2 drones with supersonic kicks. Then he got bored. He saw a drone targeting the civilian dummy from a high vantage point, and, ignoring Kate's frantic call to maintain formation, he ran straight up the side of a building to engage it. He took it out, but in doing so, he left Eli's flank completely exposed. Cassie was their heavy hitter. "Stature now," Kate commanded. "Take out the cluster on Eli's left." Cassie flinched. Deku saw it from the observation deck, a hesitation, a deep-seated fear in her eyes. She triggered her PIM particle suit, growing to 15 feet, then 20. She was a giant, a powerhouse, but she moved with a terrible reluctance. She swung a fist the size of a small car, but the blow was clumsy, telegraphed. The drones scattered, and her punch only managed to clip one, sending it spinning into a wall. The others focused their fire on her, and she cried out, shrinking back down to normal size, clutching an arm that wasn't physically wounded but glowed with the red light of a simulated energy burn. She was afraid of her own power, terrified of the collateral damage, of the space she took up in the world. Through it all, Billy stood near the back, his hands pressed to his temples. The simulated psychic chatter of the drones, a pale imitation of the real thing, was enough to send him spiraling. Reddish, chaotic energy flickered around his hands. He was supposed to be providing magical shields, hex bolts, anything. Instead, he was a non-factor, lost in his own personal storm. Simulation terminated. The calm, computerized voice of the training room announced. Result: failure. Civilian asset compromised. Team casualties, 85%. The silence that followed was heavier than any holographic explosion. What the hell was that? Eli snarled, the sweat on his brow making the grime on his face glisten. He stalked over to Tommy, who was leaning against the wall, looking anywhere but at him. "Formation, Tommy, does that word mean anything to you? You left me completely exposed." "I took out the sniper," Tommy shot back, his defensive snark kicking in. "Maybe if you weren't so busy trying to cosplay as a statue, you could have handled the rest." If Cassie had hit her target, Eli started. "Don't you put this on me," Cassie cried, her voice thick with tears. "I'm trying. It's not easy being a wrecking ball. And Billy, you were useless," Eli finally bellowed, his rage needing a new target. "Just standing there, having a headache." "It's not a headache," Billy yelled back, his voice cracking with pain and frustration. "You think I like this? You think I want to feel like my brain is being put through a meat grinder every time I try to focus? Kate just stood in the middle of it all, her bow held slack in her hand, the picture of exhausted defeat. She was a leader without an army, a strategist whose soldiers refused to listen to the strategy. Deku watched the bitter, circular argument unfold. He saw it all with a terrifying clarity. He saw Eli's desperate need to live up to a legacy he felt unworthy of, driving him to reckless charges. He saw Tommy's speed as an escape, a way to literally outrun the grief that threatened to consume him. He saw Cassie's fear of her own strength, a mirror of her fear of causing more loss. And he saw Billy, a wellspring of unimaginable power, being poisoned by the very enemy they were fighting. They had immense power. Individually, any one of them could have been a formidable hero in his world, but together they were a mess of clashing frequencies, their combined power only amplifying their dysfunction. Their grief had isolated them, turning them into islands. But no hero is an island. A team is a bridge. He slipped out of the observation room, the sound of their fighting fading behind him. He knew what he had to do. He found it in a dusty, sealed crate in the corner of the lab, a forgotten cache of office supplies from Stark's pre-Avengers days. Among the corporate-branded pens and paperweights, there was a stack of pristine, leather-bound notebooks. He picked one up. The weight of it in his hand was familiar, grounding. He found a simple ballpoint pen, its ink still fresh. It felt more natural in his grip than a weapon. He found a quiet corner, near the humming server banks that ran the tower's life support, and he sat down. He opened the notebook to the first clean, white page. For the first time since arriving in this broken world, a sliver of his old self returned. The fear, the confusion, the crushing weight of this reality, it all receded just a little. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya, the lost boy. He was Deku, the analyst, and he began to mutter, "Okay, so the primary issue isn't a lack of power, it's a lack of synergy and a fundamental misunderstanding of their own roles in a team context. Their emotional states are dictating their combat performance, leading to predictable, exploitable patterns." Eli Bradley, codename Patriot. Super Soldier Serum variant. Enhanced strength, speed, durability. Primary asset is the Vibranium Shield, both offensively and defensively. His fighting style is direct, a brawler. He tries to emulate Captain America's role as the immovable center of the team, the moral and physical anchor. His pen began to fly across the page, his neat, compact handwriting filling the lines with observations, diagrams, and branching thought bubbles. Subject, Eli Bradley, Patriot. Powers/gear, enhanced physiology. Vibranium shield, near indestructible, absorbs and redirects kinetic energy. Peak human combatant. Psychological profile, burdened by legacy. Feels immense pressure to live up to his grandfather and Steve Rogers. This manifests as a reckless need to prove himself, often leading him to overextend and take unnecessary risks. His anger is a shield for his grief and insecurity. He sees leadership as command, not cooperation. Combat analysis, excellent frontline tank. Can absorb incredible amounts of damage. However, his singular focus makes him vulnerable to flanking maneuvers. He draws aggro but has poor crowd control against the swarm. Synergy potential, must not be the sole vanguard. He needs a partner who can cover his blind spots and handle multiple, faster targets. His shield can be used collaboratively. Ricochet shots for Kate, a platform for Cassie to push off from. He needs to be directed, not unleashed. He isn't the strategist. He is the tip of the spear. Deku paused, chewing on the end of his pen. He turned the page, the image of a silver blur in his mind. Subject Tommy Shepard speed, powers/gear, superhuman speed, capable of breaking the sound barrier. Accelerated metabolism and perception, psychological profile, classic avoidance behavior. Uses his speed and snark to keep emotional connection at a distance. His impulsiveness and inability to stay still are physical manifestations of his refusal to process his grief. He feels useless unless he's in motion, leading to a disregard for strategy. Combat analysis, unparalleled skirmisher and scout. Perfect for diversions, reconnaissance, and civilian rescue. His offensive capabilities are limited to high-velocity impacts, which are ineffective against armored or numerous foes. He's a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. The team uses him like a blunt instrument. Synergy potential requires specific, short-duration objectives. Run over there and break that is a perfect command for him. His speed can create openings for others, generating a sonic boom to disorient a group before Eli charges in, or scouting the safest path for the team to advance. Next was Cassie. The gentle giant, the reluctant powerhouse. Subject, Cassie Lang, stature, powers/gear, PIM particle manipulation via suit. Can alter size and mass, granting immense strength and durability in giant form. Can also shrink. Psychological profile, deeply traumatized by the loss of her father. Her power is directly linked to her emotional state. Her hesitation and fear of causing collateral damage severely limit her effectiveness. She possesses immense power but lacks the confidence to wield it. She needs reassurance and clear, simple directives. Combat analysis, the team's artillery and wall. In giant form, she can reshape the battlefield, create barriers, and deal with large-scale threats. However, her attacks are slow and predictable due to her hesitation. Her shrinking ability is an underutilized asset for infiltration and surprise attacks. Synergy potential needs a protector. Someone to keep smaller threats off her while she focuses on the big picture. Pairing her with Eli creates a classic tank and cannon combo. Her confidence will grow with successful, controlled applications of her power. Small victories are crucial for her. He felt a pang of sympathy as he began the next entry. The boy in the corner. The key to everything. Subject, Billy Kaplan, Wiccan, powers/gear, innate, powerful magical abilities. Reality warping potential. Described as a reality warper in some files. Power manifests as red energy constructs, spells, etc. Psychological profile, crippled by fear of his own power and the constant psychic assault from the overmind. The psychic static interferes with his concentration, making spellcasting difficult and dangerous. He sees his magic as a curse, a potential weapon of mass destruction that could hurt his friends. He is terrified of becoming his mother, the Scarlet Witch, whose power levels were legendary. Combat analysis, currently a non-combatant. However, his potential is theoretically limitless. He's not just another fighter, he's a potential solution. His power isn't meant for blasting drones, it's meant to rewrite the rules of the fight. Synergy potential, the ultimate support. He needs to be protected at all costs. His role should be defensive and strategic. The team has been trying to make him a cannon, but he's a shield. Or better yet, he's the one who can jam the enemy's radio signals. The Overmind's greatest weapon is its hive mind control. If Billy could disrupt that, even locally, a light bulb went off in Deku's head, a flash of brilliant, strategic clarity. He started scribbling furiously, a plan beginning to blossom on the page, connecting the different analyses with arrows and notes. He wrote Kate's name last, a place of respect. Subject, Kate Bishop, Hawkeye, powers/gear, peak human athlete and archer. Master strategist. Bow and a variety of trick arrows, explosive, electric, sonic, etc. Psychological profile, the reluctant leader and den mother. Grounded, pragmatic, but cynical and exhausted. She carries the weight of the team's survival, but lacks the authority or the overwhelming power to command their respect in the field. Her frustration leads to a command style that is more pleading than authoritative. Combat analysis, range DPS and team coordinator. Her trick arrows provide crucial versatility. She's excellent at identifying weaknesses and directing fire, but her plans fall apart when the team fails to execute. Synergy potential, the brain. She needs a team that will actually listen to her. Her effectiveness would increase tenfold if the others would simply hold formation and trust her calls. She needs an enforcer, someone to bridge the gap between her strategies and the team's chaotic execution. Deku put the pen down, his hand cramping. He looked at his work. It wasn't just a collection of notes. It was a blueprint. A blueprint for a team. For the first time since he'd arrived, he felt a flicker of something that resembled hope. He knew what to do. He found them in the common area, engaged in a low-level argument over the last pack of real coffee. The tension was a familiar, suffocating blanket. "There's a problem," Kate announced, overriding the bickering. She pointed to a schematic on the main monitor. The primary water filtration unit is failing. We need a new cryocondenser. The closest place we might find one is the old public library. Stark funded a tech wing there years ago. It's got an archive of outdated but compatible Stark tech. A grim silence fell over the group. The library? Tommy said, the usual speed in his voice replaced with a note of dread. No way. We tried that 2 weeks ago. It's a nest, Eli added, his arms crossed over his chest. A big one. We got torn apart. The void swarm there are too coordinated. They use the bookshelves for cover, come at you from all angles. It's a death trap. We don't have a choice, Kate said, her voice strained. The recycler will fail in 48 hours. No water means we can't stay here. This was his chance. Deku stepped forward, his newly filled notebook clutched in his hand. He felt 5 pairs of eyes fall on him, a mixture of curiosity, annoyance, and outright hostility. I have a plan, he said, his voice quiet but steady. Eli scoffed. A plan? Kid, you've been here 5 minutes. You don't know what we're up against. I do, Deku countered, his gaze firm. I've been watching. Your last attempt failed because you treated it like a brawl. You went in as 5 individuals trying to smash things. The void swarm isn't a mob, it's a single organism. You can't beat it with brute force. You have to dissect it. He placed the notebook on the main holographic table and swiped his hand, bringing up a 3D map of the library that Kate had on file. He began to outline his strategy, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke, the muttering analyst transforming into a field commander. It will be a multi-phase, coordinated strike. Phase 1 diversion. Tommy, he said, looking directly at the speedster. The swarm's intelligence is centralized. I need you to be a decoy they can't ignore. I want you to run a perimeter around the library at Mach 1. Continuous sonic booms. You're not there to fight. You're there to be the loudest, most annoying thing in the entire city. Your only job is to draw the bulk of the external drones away from the entrance. Tommy blinked, a slow grin spreading across his face. Just run fast and make a lot of noise? Seriously? That's the whole plan? For you, yes, Deku confirmed. Can you do it? Can I do it? Kid, I was born for it, Tommy said, a genuine spark of excitement in his eyes. For once, he had a task that perfectly suited his skill set. Phase 2, suppression, Deku continued, turning to Kate. While Tommy has their attention, you'll take up a sniper position in the MetLife building across the street. You'll have a clear line of sight into the library's main hall through the skylights. You'll take out any sentries, any drones that don't take Tommy's bait. You will be our eyes in the sky. Kate nodded, her expression intrigued. This was organized. This was tactical. Phase 3, the assault. Deku looked at Eli and Cassie. Once Kate gives the all-clear, you two go in? Eli, your point. Shield up, draw their fire. Your only job is to advance down the center aisle towards the tech wing in the back. Don't break formation. Just be an unstoppable wall. He then turned to Cassie. Cassie, you go in at full height. You are Eli's cover. Any drones that try to flank him, you take them out. Don't worry about collateral damage, just keep that path clear. Be his shadow. Be his armor. Cassie looked nervous, but the simplicity and defensive nature of the command seemed to reassure her. She just had to protect Eli. She could do that. And me? Eli grunted, still skeptical. I'll be with you, Deku said. I'll be your support. I'll use Black Whip for mobility, to pull you out of danger, to clear debris, to handle any stragglers that get past Cassie. We will operate as a single, 3-person unit. The plan was solid. It was a good plan. But Eli could still see the flaw. It's the same problem as last time. We can take out the drones, but the hive mind just adapts. They'll overwhelm us eventually. They're too coordinated. Which brings us to Phase 4, Deku said, taking a deep breath. He turned to the last, most critical member of the team. Billy. Billy, who had been listening with a growing sense of dread, visibly flinched. No. I can't. The psychic noise in a nest that big. I won't be able to think, let alone cast a spell. You don't have to cast the spell, Deku said gently. You don't have to fight. I've been reading Mr. Stark's files on your abilities. The Overmind's control is psychic, a broadcast signal. I think you can jam it. Jam it? How? Billy whispered, his hands beginning to tremble. I don't need you to create a massive explosion or a complex hex. I need you to do the opposite. I need you to create a bubble of magical silence around yourself. A small, localized field of pure chaos energy. Something that will interrupt the psychic frequency from the Overmind. You won't be fighting them with power, you'll be fighting them with static. Deku stepped closer, his voice dropping. He wasn't giving an order anymore. He was making a plea. I know you're scared, Billy. But this isn't about destroying things. It's about protecting us. Your static can be our shield. It will sever the drones from the hive mind. They'll be disorganized, confused, just machines. We can handle machines. Billy looked at the desperate faces of his friends. He looked at this strange, green-eyed boy who seemed to understand his power better than he did. For the first time, someone wasn't asking him to be a weapon. They were asking him to be a shield. He took a shaky breath and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Eli stared at Deku, at the detailed plan, at the way he had given everyone a specific, necessary role. He hated to admit it, but it was brilliant. It used their strengths and mitigated their weaknesses in a way they had never managed to do themselves. Fine, Eli finally conceded, his voice a low grumble. We'll try it your way, notebook boy. But if this goes sideways, it's on you. A hero's plan never goes perfectly, Deku replied, a faint, determined smile on his face as he recalled the words of his mentor. That's why we have to go beyond. Plus ultra. The words meant nothing to them, but the conviction with which he said them was, for the first time, contagious. The execution was terrifyingly perfect. Tommy was a howling green banshee, a circle of sonic booms and silver lightning that drew the attention of every Void Swarm drone within a 5-block radius. The street-level patrols converged on his path, firing wildly at a target that was never there. From her perch in the shattered office of a long-dead CEO, Kate Bishop felt a grim smile touch her lips. Show-offs, she muttered, but her heart wasn't in it. She lined up her shot, the specialized optics in her visor highlighting the 3 drones still lurking inside the library entrance. Thwip. 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 3 silent, precise shots. 3 explosive arrows detonated, and the entrance was clear. Hawkeye to ground team, she said into her comm. The nest is stirred. You're clear for entry. Acknowledged, came Eli's gruff voice. Let's move. The library's main doors groaned open under Eli's strength. He entered first, shield raised, a walking fortress of vibranium. Immediately, dozens of insectodrones, sleek black machines with glowing red optics, descended from the ceiling and from behind bookshelves, unleashing a volley of plasma fire. The shots sizzled and dissipated harmlessly against Eli's shield. Boom! A massive foot shook the entire building. Cassie, now 30 feet tall, stooped to fit through the grand entrance, her armored fist smashing a trio of drones into scrap metal. I've got your back, Eli, she yelled, her voice resonating with a newfound confidence. Deku was a whirlwind of green lightning between them. A drone slipped past Eli's shield, and a whip of black energy shot from Deku's arm, snagging it and slamming it into the floor. Black whip! He saw a section of the mezzanine starting to crumble above Cassie's head. He fired another whip, securing the balcony with crackling black tendrils. He wasn't the star of the show. He was the director, the stage manager, ensuring the heroes could perform their roles perfectly. They advanced, a slow, unstoppable tide of shield, fist, and lightning. But Eli had been right. The swarm was adapting. More drones poured in, their tactics shifting. They began to target the structural weaknesses in the ceiling, trying to bury them in rubble. Deku, they're starting to coordinate. Kate's voice crackled over the comm. The hive mind is reasserting control. It's now or never. Billy! Deku yelled, his voice echoing in the cavernous library. Do it now! Near the entrance, sheltered behind a marble information desk, Billy was trembling. The psychic scream of the nest was a physical force, threatening to tear him apart. He could feel the cold, calculating intelligence of the overmind focusing on them. Protect them, he thought, squeezing his eyes shut. Be a shield. He stopped fighting the chaos in his head and embraced it. He let his fear, his pain, his power, all of it, swirl into a single point. Red energy, darker and more vibrant than before, bled from his fingertips. I can't make it stop, he whispered, but I can make it louder. He threw his hands out, and a wave of shimmering, crimson energy erupted from him. It wasn't an attack. It was a broadcast. A wave of pure, weaponized chaos. The bubble of silence. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Across the library, every single void swarm drone froze for a split second. Their glowing red optics flickered, then dimmed to a dull orange. The coordinated assault dissolved. Some drones began firing wildly at the ceiling. Others turned on each other, tearing into their former comrades with mechanical claws. One simply flew headfirst into a wall and exploded. Billy had done it. He hadn't destroyed them. He had cut their strings. They were puppets, and he had severed them from the puppet master. The rest was a cleanup. With the swarm in disarray, the team tore through them. Eli and Cassie cleared the main floor while Deku and Kate picked off the stragglers. In 10 minutes, the library was silent, littered with the smoking husks of deactivated machines. They had done it. They had won. A whoop of pure, unadulterated joy came from Tommy as he zipped into the library, his diversion complete. Did you guys see that? It actually worked. Cassie, back to her normal size, was laughing, a real, genuine laugh. Eli stood amidst the wreckage, a slow, grudging look of respect on his face as he looked at Deku. Kate dropped down from a balcony, a small, proud smile on her face. It was in that moment of triumph, that first, fragile spark of hope, that the overmind finally responded. It wasn't a sound. It was an invasion. Billy screamed and collapsed, clutching his head as blood trickled from his nose. The psychic backlash from severing so many drones from the network hit him like a battering ram. The others cried out, stumbling to their knees, their hands flying to their temples. Eli, Kate, Cassie, Tommy, all of them were paralyzed by a psychic blast of pure, malevolent pressure. Deku alone remained standing. His danger sense was shrieking, a piercing, deafening alarm, but the mental attack slid off his consciousness like water off glass. He watched in horror as his new team writhed in silent agony, and then a voice entered their minds. It was ancient, cold, and vast as the void between galaxies. It was not heard with the ears, but felt in the soul. A voice of absolute, chilling dominance. Anomaly detected. The word echoed in their skulls, a violation of their innermost thoughts, a flaw in the pattern, a blind spot in the eye of God. The voice seemed to focus, its immense, terrifying consciousness turning towards the one being it couldn't directly touch, seeing him only through the pain of its puppets. You cannot hide behind the Star Child. The pressure vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The team lay gasping on the floor, trembling from the psychic violation. Deku stood alone in the center of their first true victory, his heart pounding with a new and terrible understanding. His plan had worked. He had shown them how to be a team again, but in doing so, he had taken them from being survivors hiding in the shadows and turned them into a target. He was the anomaly, and now, for the first time, the all-seeing eye of the Overmind was turning its full, undivided attention directly on them. The victory at the library was a poisoned chalice. They had won the battle, securing the cryocondenser and, for the first time, operating as a cohesive unit. But they had lost the war for anonymity. The Overmind's chilling, personal message had changed the rules of the game. Before, they were vermin, hiding in the walls of its conquered world. Now, they were a recognized threat. They were being hunted. Life in the nest transformed from a tense, static survival into a desperate, running defense. The low-level husk patrols in the surrounding blocks were replaced by something far worse. Deku, on a scouting run with Kate, saw the first one. It moved with a liquid grace that was utterly alien to the shambling husks or the insective void swarm drones. Taller than a man, impossibly thin, and clad in shifting, non-Euclidean armor that seemed to absorb the light around it, the creature carried a long, scythe-like blade that crackled with contained, violet energy. Its head was a smooth, featureless ovoid, and it moved with a silent, terrifying purpose. Reaper, Kate breathed from their hiding spot in a gutted coffee shop, her voice tight with a fear Deku had never heard from her before. His elite hunters. They're sentient. They can strategize. They can track. The Reaper paused in the middle of the street, its faceless head slowly sweeping the area. Deku's danger sense, which had become a manageable background hum, spiked into a sharp, piercing shriek aimed directly at their position. The thing knew they were there. Not their exact location, but their presence. It could smell them on the psychic winds. We have to go. Now, Kate hissed, and they slipped out the back, a desperate flight through the concrete jungle with the specter of a silent hunter at their heels. The pressure was relentless. They couldn't stay in one place for long. Scavenging runs became high-stakes military operations. The very air in the nest felt heavier, charged with the knowledge that a Reaper could be silently mapping their defenses from a block away, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The brief, fragile hope they had found in the library was being systematically crushed under the weight of constant, gnawing paranoia. The final straw came a week later. The tower's already failing power generator, strained by the constant use of their defensive systems and holographic training room, sputtered and died with a groan of tortured metal. The main lights went out, plunging the nest into the dim, red glow of emergency backup power. The humming life support systems fell silent, replaced by an ominous, ticking clock. Main power core is fried, Cassie reported, her face smudged with grease, her voice trembling. She had been trying to coax the aging arc reactor tech for days. The capacitor bank is completely melted. We're running on batteries, and they'll be dry in, maybe 12 hours. The implication was stark. No power meant no water filtration, no defensive turrets, no sealed doors. The nest would become a steel tomb. We need a new capacitor, Kate said, her voice grim. She pulled up a schematic of the tower on the main console, its screen now flickering erratically. Stark was always building backups for his backups. There should be a compatible unit in his personal lab. Sub-level 12? The workshop. That's a negative, Kate, Eli said, his voice a low rumble. He was looking at a different screen, one showing the tower's external sensor logs. The workshop is 3 levels below us, but the only access shaft is on the other side of the tower. And that entire section has been compromised. The overmind caved in the upper floors right above it. It's buried under 100,000 tons of steel and concrete. And that's not the worst of it, Eli continued, zooming in on the sensor feed. There are Reapers crawling all over that section. 3 of them. It's like they know it's a critical area. Despair, cold and familiar, began to settle over the room. It was a checkmate. They were trapped, their power bleeding away, with an insurmountable obstacle between them and their only hope of survival. Deku stared at the schematic, his mind racing. He wasn't looking at the obstacle. He was looking for a way through. His eyes traced the power conduits, the ventilation shafts, the structural supports. The heroes of this world had been broken by psychic attacks, by the weaponization of their own emotions. But the overmind, for all its cosmic intelligence, still thought in terms of force and psychic domination. It had blocked the direct path. But Tony Stark was a man who always built a back door. It blocked the direct path, Deku began, muttering to himself, tracing a line on the screen with his finger. But it thinks like a conqueror, not an engineer. The primary access is blocked, but what about the service conduits? Stark wouldn't power his most important lab from a single source. There has to be a redundant system. His finger stopped on a tiny, barely noticeable line on the schematic, labeled Auxiliary Coolant Line 7B. It was a pipe, no more than a meter in diameter, that snaked its way from their sublevel, through several layers of bedrock and foundation, and connected directly to the workshop's thermal regulation system. It was never meant for passage. It was a maintenance crawlspace at best. There, Deku said, his voice cutting through the gloom. That's our way in. The others crowded around the screen. A coolant pipe? Tommy scoffed. You want us to crawl through that? We don't even know if it's clear. It's a long shot, Kate admitted, but it's the only shot we have. Cassie, can you and I fit? If I shrink down, maybe, Cassie said, uncertainty lacing her voice. But what's the point? Even if we get there, the main door to the workshop is a triple reinforced titanium vault. We can't get it open without power. We won't have to, Deku said, his eyes gleaming with a manic analytical light. "We're not going to open the door. We're going to reboot the lab's private power source." According to this schematic, Stark had a small, independent arc reactor just for the workshop, to keep his projects isolated from the tower's main grid. "It's offline, in fail-safe mode. If we can get to its control panel and restart it, the workshop will power itself up. Then we can access the capacitor and maybe, just maybe, find something else." It was a plan born of pure desperation, a one-in-a-million shot. But it was better than sitting in the dark, waiting to die. The journey through the coolant pipe was a claustrophobic nightmare. It was a tight squeeze even for Deku and Kate, and for a shrunken Cassie, it was a terrifying crawl through an endless, dark tunnel. The air was cold and tasted of stale chemicals. The only sound was the scrape of their bodies against the metal, and their own ragged breaths. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a pitch-black space. Deku, activating a low-level focal, cast a faint green glow, illuminating their surroundings. They were inside the workshop. It was a place of ghosts. Holographic blueprints for unfinished projects hung frozen in the air, their light long dead. A half-finished Iron Man gauntlet lay on a workbench, tools scattered around it as if its creator had just stepped away for a moment. Prototypes of Captain America's energy shields were mounted on a wall next to schematics for a new Quinjet. It was a cathedral of genius, a testament to a future that would never come to pass. "The reactor control panel should be over there," Deku whispered, pointing towards a recessed alcove in the far wall. They moved through the hallowed space with a reverence typically reserved for tombs. Kate ran a hand over the cool metal of a new helmet for Falcon, her expression unreadable. Cassie stared at a photo on a workbench. Tony Stark, arms slung around a beaming Scott Lang, both of them grinning at the camera. A fresh wave of grief washed over her, and she had to turn away. Deku's attention, however, was drawn to the center of the room. A massive, circular console sat dormant, surrounded by several smaller terminals. It was clearly a central project, bigger than anything else in the lab. "Let's focus on the reactor," Kate said, gently pulling them back to the mission. "We don't have time for a walk down memory lane." They reached the control panel. It was, as expected, completely dead. "Okay, it's a cold start," Deku said, prying open a service hatch. "The igniter needs a massive jolt of energy to kickstart the fusion process. The internal battery is dead. We need to provide the spark." He looked at his own hands, the green lightning of one for all already crackling in anticipation. "I can do it. I can channel a controlled burst directly into the ignition coil." "Are you sure?" Kate asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "That's a precision instrument, not a punching bag. Too little, and it won't start. Too much, and you could overload the whole system, maybe even blow us all up." "I can control it," Deku said, his voice steady. He had practiced this kind of fine control for years, learning to channel his overwhelming power into delicate, specific tasks. He pressed his fingers against the exposed conduits, closed his eyes, and focused. "One for all. 5%. Delaware smash. Air Force," he whispered, not unleashing the punch but channeling the buildup of energy that preceded it. A controlled, steady stream of emerald lightning flowed from his fingertips into the machine. The conduits glowed, first a faint green, then a brilliant white. A low hum started, rapidly rising in pitch. The lights on the control panel flickered to life one by one. Arc reactor ignition sequence initiated, a calm, feminine, and startlingly familiar voice announced from the lab's speakers. The hum built to a crescendo, and then, with a satisfying thrum that vibrated through the floor, the reactor came online. The workshop was flooded with bright, clean light. The holographic displays shimmered back to life, and the hum of powerful technology filled the silence. "Primary power restored," the voice continued. "Welcome back, boss. You've been gone for 487 days. Shall I run the usual morning diagnostic?" Kate and Cassie stared at the ceiling speaker, their faces pale. "FRIDY," Kate whispered, her voice cracking. "That is my designation, Agent Bishop," the AI replied, her tone as placid as ever. "It is good to hear your voice. My sensors indicate the presence of Cassandra Lang and one unidentified individual. His biosignatures are anomalous." "It's okay," FRIDY, Kate said, a sad smile touching her lips. He's with us. The activation of the lab's power had done more than just turn on the lights. It had woken up a ghost in the machine. A ghost of Tony Stark's most trusted companion. FRIDY, Deku said, stepping forward, his mind buzzing with 1,000 questions. What is the status of this facility? Of the world? The world, Izuku Midoriya, is operating at 2.7% of its pre-event efficiency, FRIDY stated, her voice tinged with a digital melancholy. This facility has been in automated lockdown since the Great Silencing. I have been isolated, running on a closed loop, my external sensors severed to prevent psychic infiltration by the entity designated Overmind. The AI's voice was a painful reminder of the order and sanity that had been lost. But then, her tone shifted, becoming more purposeful. Boss anticipated a potential decapitation strike, a scenario where the world's primary leadership and heroes were compromised. He and Dr. Richards initiated a final contingency protocol, Project Chimera. A new holographic display lit up on the central console, the one that had drawn Deku's eye earlier. It showed a complex, multi-layered weapons schematic. However, FRIDY continued, my primary protocol in this event was not to deploy a weapon, but to deliver a message. A final echo. The lights in the lab dimmed, and a new hologram flickered to life in the center of the room. It was a life-sized, pre-recorded image of Tony Stark. He wasn't in his Iron Man suit. He was in his workshop clothes, a grease-stained t-shirt and jeans. He looked tired, older than Deku remembered from the files, but his eyes burned with their trademark intensity. He paced back and forth, running a hand through his hair. If you're seeing this, the recording of Tony began, his voice tinny and distant, a voice from beyond the grave, then it means we failed. Spectacularly? It means the big brain, the god in the machine, whatever you want to call it, won. It means we're gone. All of us. He stopped pacing and looked directly at the camera, as if he could see them standing there, 487 days in the future. Don't mourn us, he said, his voice softening. We knew the risks. Every time we suited up, we knew this was a possibility. But we made a promise. If we can't protect the Earth, you can be damn sure we'll avenge it. Well, I guess this is that part of the program. From off-screen, another figure walked into the frame. Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, stood beside Tony, his face etched with a weary intelligence. The entity you are facing, Reed said, his voice the calm, measured tone of a scientist delivering a final, terrible lecture, is a psychic parasite of a cosmic scale. We've designated it the Overmind. It does not conquer civilizations with force, not primarily. It consumes them. It latches onto a species' collective consciousness and feeds on their emotions, their memories, their very essence, until there is nothing left but an empty shell, a husk civilization slave to its will. Tony took over, pointing at the schematic that was now floating beside them. We couldn't fight it on the psychic plane. None of us were strong enough. Trying to fight a psychic god with thoughts is like trying to put out the sun with a water pistol. So, we did what we do best. We built a better water pistol. The schematic resolved into a sleeker, more detailed image. It was an antenna of some kind, a broadcast dish of intricate, almost organic design. Project Chimera, Reed explained. We call it the Psyche Disruptor. It doesn't fight the Overmind directly. That would be suicide. Instead, it targets its control over its army. The Void Swarm, the husks, they are all connected to the Overmind via a constant, high-frequency psychic signal, not unlike a radio broadcast. The disruptor is designed to broadcast a counter-frequency, a wave of pure, chaotic psychic static. It won't kill the Overmind, but it will sever its connection to its puppets. It will, in essence, render its entire army inert. Deku stared at the blueprint, his mind alight. It was Billy's ability. On a global scale. The plan he had stumbled upon at the library, it was the key. Stark and Richards had come to the same conclusion. The bad news, Tony said, his expression turning grim, is that we never finished it. The components are too specialized, too powerful to be kept in one place. A security precaution. If the Overmind found the lab, we didn't want it getting the whole toy. The schematic broke apart into 3 distinct pieces, each one tagged with a location. There are 3 core components, Reed elaborated. 1. The focusing lens. It's made from a crystal matrix grown in the Zero-G labs at the Shield Triskelion. It's needed to shape and aim the psychic broadcast. 2. The power amplifier, Tony added. We needed something that could handle reality warping energy levels without turning into a puddle. Turns out, the X-Men had just the thing in their danger room control systems. A piece of Shi'ar crystal tech. It's in the sublevels of the Xavier Institute. And 3, Reed concluded, the resonance chamber. The heart of the device. It modulates the frequency. It was my own design, built using unstable molecules. It is secured in a private vault at the Baxter Building. The weight of the mission slammed into Deku, Kate, and Cassie. The Triskelion was a sunken ruin at the bottom of the Hudson. The X-Mansion was a known psychic nexus, a hotspot of the Overmind's power. And the Baxter Building was ground zero for the Fantastic Four's fall. 3 of the most dangerous, most haunted locations on the planet. The hologram of Tony Stark sighed, a surprisingly human sound. Look, this is a Hail Mary. A shot in the dark, thrown by a bunch of dead guys. But it's the only shot you've got. The plans are all here. FRIDY has everything you need to assemble it. You just have to go get the pieces. He looked at Reed, who gave a solemn nod. Tony then looked back at the camera, a final, defiant spark in his eyes. The world's broken. The good guys lost. But I'm betting someone survived. I'm betting there's still someone out there willing to fight. So if you're seeing this, Kate, if you're there, don't let it be for nothing. The world's in your hands now. Don't drop it. The recording flickered and died, plunging the lab back into its quiet, humming ambience. For a long moment, the 3 of them stood in stunned silence, the final words of a fallen legend echoing in the air. It was a will and testament. A final mission, bequeathed to the survivors. It seemed impossible. Suicidal, even. They were just a handful of broken, terrified kids. How could they possibly succeed where the world's greatest heroes had failed? Kate was the first to move. She walked to the console, her face set in a mask of grim determination. She placed her hand on the cool metal, right where the hologram of Tony had been standing. Cassie looked from the empty space to the schematics, her eyes filled with a new, fragile resolve. Her father's best friend had just given them a job to do, but it was Deku they both looked to. He was the anomaly, the outsider, the one who had fallen into their dying world. But he was also the one who had given them their first victory, the one who had shown them they could be a team again. He had become, in a few short weeks, their anchor. He looked at the mission laid out before them. He looked at the faces of his new comrades, saw the fear warring with a desperate, burgeoning hope. He thought of his own world, of his promise to be the greatest hero. He had thought that meant saving people from falling buildings and stopping villains. He never imagined it would mean this. He never imagined it would mean inheriting the final, desperate hope of a fallen world. The choice was simple. There was no choice at all. They had been surviving, hiding in the dark, waiting for the end. Now they had a blueprint for a beginning. He met Kate's gaze, his own eyes burning with a green fire that seemed to push back the shadows of the workshop. We've been surviving, he said, his voice clear and ringing with a conviction that left no room for doubt. Now we have a way to fight back. Stark and Richards left us a blueprint. It's our turn to build the solution. He looked from Kate to Cassie, then spoke as if the others were there with them in the room. He wasn't just a strategist anymore. He was a leader, claiming the title not with arrogance, but with the quiet, unshakable certainty of purpose. This is our mission now. The mission briefing was the most hopeful and the most terrifying meeting they had ever had. Back in the nest, with the new capacitor installed and the lights burning steady and bright, FRIDY's calm, disembodied voice walked them through the schematics of the Psyche Disruptor. The impossible plan now had a name, a shape, and a shopping list from hell. FRIDY's analysis confirms that the Triskelion is the most structurally compromised, but the least psychically active of the 3 locations, Kate announced, pointing to a holographic map of the sunken Shield headquarters. The focusing lens is in a submerged Zero-G research lab, level Gamma. The Overmind's forces can't operate effectively underwater. The primary threat will be structural instability and automated shield defenses that are likely still active and hostile. So, no Reapers, just drones and a whole lot of water pressure, Tommy summarized, idly vibrating in place. Sounds like a vacation. It's a two-person infiltration mission, Deku clarified, stepping forward and taking over the briefing. His notebook was open on the console, but he barely glanced at it. He had run the simulations in his head 100 times already. Stealth and precision are key. We need someone who can handle the pressure, both literally and figuratively, and someone who can provide heavy support if things go wrong. Eli, you're on point. That shield can deflect anything the automated defenses throw at us, and your physicals can handle the environment. I'll be your backup. A tense silence fell over the room. Eli, who had been leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, straightened up. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Of all the possible pairings, this was the one he wanted the least. He and the outsider. The legacy and the anomaly. Why me? Eli asked, his voice a low, challenging rumble. Why not Kate? She's better at stealth. Kate's our mission coordinator, Deku replied, his tone even and respectful, refusing to rise to the challenge. She and FRIDY will be our eyes and ears from here, and Cassie's PIM particle suit isn't rated for the kind of pressure we'll be facing at that depth. This mission is tailor-made for your skill set, Eli. You're the only one who can punch through a bulkhead if we get trapped. You're the tank. Eli couldn't argue with the logic, and it infuriated him. He hated that this newcomer, this notebook boy, could see his potential so clearly and articulate it so clinically. It felt less like a compliment, and more like being a tool selected from a toolbox. But the mission came first. He gave a curt, reluctant nod. Fine. When do we leave? The descent into the Hudson was a journey into a cold, dark abyss. They were equipped with SHIELD-grade rebreathers and tactical gear salvaged from the tower's armory. The water was a murky brown, visibility reduced to a few feet, pierced only by the high-intensity beams of their helmet lamps. The weight of the river above them was a constant, crushing presence. The Triskelion was a fallen giant, a tri-bladed leviathan half buried in the silt and mud of the riverbed. One of its massive wings was sheared clean off, and a gaping wound in its side marked their entry point. Inside, it was a graveyard. The emergency lights flickered erratically, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like specters in the water-filled corridors. Schools of fish darted through what was once a bustling command center, their scales glinting in the light. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hiss of their rebreathers and the groaning of stressed metal. FRIDY, can you read me? Kate's voice crackled over their comms, distorted by the water. Loud and clear, Hawkeye, the AI's voice replied, remarkably crisp. I'm piggybacking on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s old combuis. According to the schematics, the Gamma Lab is 4 levels down. Be advised, I'm detecting automated security systems coming online. They appear to be targeting all unauthorized biosignatures. That means you. As if on cue, sections of the hallway ahead lit up with red alert strobes. From panels in the walls, sleek, automated gun turrets unfolded, their targeting lasers cutting swaths through the murky water. Contact! Eli yelled, his voice muffled by his rebreather. He didn't hesitate. He surged forward, shield raised, becoming a one-man battering ram. The turrets opened fire, unleashing streams of high-velocity flechettes. The projectiles pinged harmlessly off the vibranium shield, the impact sending shockwaves through the water. Deku moved in his wake, a green phantom in the dark. He activated a 10% full cal, the emerald lightning crackling around him, creating a temporary, ethereal bubble of light. He used Black Whip not as a weapon, but as a tool, firing tendrils of black energy to rip the turrets from their mountings, tossing them aside before they could retarget. They moved with a brutal efficiency, a synchronized dance of defense and offense. Eli was the shield, Deku was the sword. They cleared corridor after corridor, the wreckage of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s last line of defense piling up behind them. To an outside observer, they looked like a perfect team, but inside Eli's helmet, a different war was being waged. It started subtly. A whisper at the edge of his hearing, a cold tendril of thought that didn't feel like his own. The overmind. It couldn't control him here, not directly. The psychic interference from the water and the triskeleton's hull was too strong. But it could still whisper. It could still find the cracks. Look at him, the voice murmured, a sibilant echo in the back of his mind. It sounded like his own thoughts, but colder, crueler. So powerful. So effortless. He doesn't even belong here, yet he moves like a king in this fallen kingdom. Eli grunted, slamming his shield into a malfunctioning security drone, crushing it against a bulkhead. He tried to shake the thought away, focusing on the mission. They reached a collapsed section of the corridor. A massive support beam, twisted and groaning, blocked their path. I can clear it, Eli said, planting his feet. Give me some room. Wait, Eli, Deku cautioned, his danger sense flaring. The structure is unstable. If you just punch it, the whole ceiling could come down. He's questioning you, the voice whispered, its tone laced with mocking condescension. The little boy with the notebook thinks he knows better than a super soldier. Better than the legacy of Captain America. The word struck a nerve, raw and exposed. Legacy. It was the heaviest word in Eli's vocabulary. It was the weight he carried every single day, heavier than the vibranium shield strapped to his arm. I know what I'm doing, Eli snapped, more to the voice in his head than to Deku. He ignored Deku's warning, channeling all his strength into a single, powerful shove. The beam moved, but Deku had been right. With a deafening shriek of tearing metal, the ceiling above them began to buckle. A torrent of twisted rebar and concrete slabs rained down. Move! Deku yelled. He pushed Eli forward, out of the primary collapse zone, just as a huge chunk of the ceiling slammed down where they had been standing, kicking up a blinding cloud of silt. Deku himself was caught by the edge of the collapse, a heavy piece of debris striking his leg, pinning him. He cried out, a sharp gasp of pain. Deku! Eli spun around, his heart pounding. Through the swirling silt, he saw Deku trapped, his leg bent at an unnatural angle under a slab of concrete. Weak, the voice hissed, a triumphant, venomous sound. He talks of plans and strategy, but at the first sign of trouble, he crumbles. A liability. Not a hero. Shut up, Eli growled, wading back into the rubble. He gripped the edge of the slab, his muscles straining as he lifted it, freeing Deku. Deku's leg was a mess. A deep gash was bleeding freely into the water, and the bone was clearly broken. He gritted his teeth, his face pale. I'm okay. I can still move. You can't, Eli stated, his voice flat. We have to abort. No, Deku said, his voice tight with pain but firm with resolve. The mission, we're almost there. We can't fail. He wants you to carry him, the voice mocked. The great hero, reduced to a burden. Your grandfather didn't need to be carried. Captain America never faltered. But you're stuck playing nursemaid to a crippled alien. The psychic poison was seeping deeper, twisting his frustration into a cold, simmering rage. Every word from the overmind was tailored to his deepest insecurities. The feeling of being a pale imitation, the fear of not measuring up. The resentment of this outsider who, in a few short weeks, had taken command of his team. He helped Deku to his feet, letting him lean on his shoulder. They pressed on, their progress now painfully slow. Deku was trying to hide the extent of his injury, but every step sent a fresh wave of agony through him, and Eli could feel it. The mission had become a crawl. They finally reached the heavy blast doors of the Gamma Lab. The doors were sealed, a keypad next to them dark and unresponsive. FRIDY, we're at the lab, Eli reported, his voice strained. Doors are sealed. No power. I'm reading a localized energy surge from within the lab, the AI responded. It seems the lab's independent power source is creating a feedback loop with the damaged security systems. You'll have to find the manual override. A panel slid open next to the door, revealing a mess of fried circuits and a single, large, red lever. But guarding it was the source of the power surge. A hunter-killer drone, a top-of-the-line shield. Prototype. It was larger than the standard models, heavily armored, and equipped with multiple weapon systems. Its single, glowing red optics swiveled and fixed on them. We have to take it down to get to the lever, Deku said, leaning heavily against the wall. Eli, you draw its fire. I'll find an opening. An opening for what? The voice in Eli's head laughed. To fall over? To bleed all over the floor? He is useless. This is your fight. Your chance to prove you are more than just a name, your chance to be the hero he only pretends to be. This was it. The culmination of his frustration, his grief, and the Overmind's insidious whispers. He looked at the powerful drone. He looked at the wounded boy beside him. He looked at the shield on his arm. A desperate, reckless fire ignited in his gut. He was done being a supporting player in the Deku show. He was done following orders. He was going to end this, right here, right now. His way. I've got this, Eli said, his voice dangerously calm. He shoved Deku back, away from the fight. Stay out of it. Eli, wait. We need a plan. Deku protested, trying to stand. I am the plan. Eli roared, the sound a mixture of defiance and desperation. He charged. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of red, white, and blue. He met the drone head-on, his shield absorbing a barrage of plasma fire. He was faster, stronger, more brutal than Deku had ever seen him. He wasn't fighting like Captain America anymore. He was fighting like a cornered animal. He slammed his shield into the drone's legs, knocking it off balance. He threw the shield, ricocheting it off the walls in a dazzling, impossible display, striking the drone from 3 directions at once. He was magnificent. He was brilliant, and he was losing. The hunter-killer was a machine. It didn't feel fear or desperation. It analyzed, adapted, and countered. It weathered Eli's initial assault, its armor plating dented but holding. Then, it went on the offensive. It deployed electrified grapples, and snaring Eli's shield arm. It fired a concussive blast that sent him staggering back. It opened a panel in its chest, revealing a cluster of micro-missiles. Eli, desperate to prove himself, ignored the danger. He ignored Deku's frantic shouts to fall back. He tore the grapple from his arm and charged again, a reckless, suicidal assault. This was his moment. This would be his victory. The drone fired the missiles. Time seemed to slow down. Eli saw the trails of smoke, saw the imminent impacts. He knew he couldn't block them all. He had overextended. He had failed. In his desperate attempt to live up to the legacy, he had disgraced it. Then, a blur of green lightning shot past him. Deku, his face a mask of excruciating pain, had pushed off the wall with his good leg. He was a comet of pure, unadulterated power. The green energy of One for All flared around him, illuminating the entire chamber in its brilliant light. His broken leg trailed uselessly behind him, but his upper body was a coiled spring of unimaginable force. One for All. 45%. St. Louis. Smash! He didn't punch the missiles. He punched the water in front of them. The impact was cataclysmic. He created a shockwave, a solid wall of kinetic force that detonated the missiles prematurely in a blinding, underwater explosion. The back blast threw the hunter-killer drone back, slamming it into the far wall with enough force to crush its chassis. But the shockwave also hit Deku, tossing his already injured body like a rag doll. He collided with a bulkhead, and the sickening crack of his own shoulder dislocating echoed through the water. The chamber fell silent. The drone was scrap. The path to the lever was clear. Deku floated limply in the water for a moment before forcing himself upright, his arm hanging uselessly at his side, his face contorted in a silent scream of agony. He had saved Eli. He had saved the mission, and he had utterly broken himself in the process. The return trip to the nest was a long, silent ordeal. Eli, humbled and shamed, practically carried the semi-conscious Deku through the dark, water-filled corridors. The whispers in his mind were gone, replaced by the roaring sound of his own failure. He had let his pride, his anger, and the enemy's poison nearly get them both killed. The outsider, the boy he resented, had sacrificed himself to save him from his own stupidity. Back in the lab, the mood was somber. Cassie tended to Deku's injuries with a practiced, gentle hand, her face a mixture of concern and quiet admiration. The focusing lens, a beautiful, pulsating crystal, sat on the workbench, a trophy from a victory that felt more like a defeat. Eli sat alone in a corner, the shield resting on the floor by his feet. He stared at it, at the scratches and dents he had earned in his reckless charge. He had wanted to prove he was worthy of carrying it. Instead, he had proven the opposite. He expected Kate to yell at him, to berate him for his recklessness. He deserved it. But it was Deku who sought him out. Cassie had set his leg in a makeshift cast and put his arm in a sling. He looked battered, broken, but his eyes were clear. He limped over to where Eli was sitting and, with a pained grunt, lowered himself to sit on a crate opposite him. For a long moment, they just sat in silence. Eli refused to meet his gaze, his eyes fixed on the scarred star on his shield. "It spoke to you, didn't it?" Deku said, his voice soft. "The overmind. It got inside your head." Eli flinched, but he didn't deny it. He just gave a slow, bitter nod. It told me what I already knew. That I'm not him. That I'm a cheap copy, running on a knockoff serum, carrying a shield I didn't earn." He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a pain that went deeper than any physical wound. "And you know what? It was right. I acted like a fool. I was so desperate to prove I was a hero that I stopped acting like one. I almost got us killed." He looked at Deku's cast, at his sling. "I almost got you killed." He expected Deku to agree. To lecture him. To tell him he wasn't fit to lead, let alone carry the shield. Instead, Deku smiled. A small, tired, but genuine smile. "I know what that's like," Deku said. Eli just stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about? You fell out of the sky with the power of a god." "No," Deku said, shaking his head. "The power isn't mine. I wasn't born with it. For most of my life, I was quirkless. Powerless. Everyone told me I could never be a hero." He told him everything. About being a small, quirkless boy in a world of superheroes. About his desperate, hopeless dream. About All Might, the symbol of peace, choosing him, this powerless nobody, to be his successor. He spoke of the crushing weight of that legacy, the impossible standard he had to live up to every single day. "My power, one for all, it's a torch that's been passed down through generations," Deku explained. "I'm the 9th to hold it. And every single day, I feel the ghosts of the 8 heroes who came before me, watching me, judging me. Every time I fail, I feel like I'm failing all of them. I feel like I'm not worthy." He looked at Eli, his green eyes filled with a profound and unexpected empathy. "I know the weight of a legacy, Eli. I know what it feels like to be drowning under the expectations of a symbol you feel like you haven't earned." He gestured with his good hand towards the shield. "But a symbol isn't about being perfect. All Might taught me that. He was the greatest hero my world has ever known, and he had fears, he had regrets, he made mistakes. A symbol isn't about never falling down." Deku leaned forward, his gaze intense and unwavering. "It's about getting back up. Every single time. No matter how many times you get knocked down, no matter how much it hurts, you get back up and you keep fighting. You were reckless today. You made a mistake, but you got back up. You carried me home. You finished the mission. That's why you can carry that shield." The words landed on Eli not as a lecture, but as an absolution. This boy, this outsider, he wasn't judging him. He was understanding him. He saw the burden, not just the power. He saw the boy crushed under the weight of the legend. Tears welled in Eli's eyes, hot and shameful, but he didn't wipe them away. The anger that had been his constant companion, the bitter resentment he had harbored for this boy, it all just dissolved. It washed away, leaving behind a raw, aching vulnerability, and in its place, a seed of something new, respect. He looked at Deku, truly looked at him for the first time. He saw not an anomaly or a rival, but a kindred spirit. A boy who understood the crushing burden of trying to be a hero in a world that demanded perfection. Eli reached out and offered his hand. Deku took it with his good one, his grip surprisingly firm. "Thank you, Izuku," Eli said, using his real name for the first time. The name Deku no longer sounded like a joke. It sounded like a title. "Call me Deku," he replied with a smile. "All my friends do." From across the lab, Kate watched them, a small, hopeful smile on her own face. The first piece of the Psyche Disruptor was secured. But in the cold, crushing depths of the Hudson, they had found something far more important. They had started to forge a team.